Hi, everyone. Great to be with you this morning. Today, I'm going to share a little bit about what we're doing at the Wharton Club of New York as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And maybe that will give you some ideas as to how you could embrace some of these elements in your own clubs. So first, I'll start out with a wonderful quote from one of our own, a fellow Wharton alum who's CEO of Google. I think you guys all know him. He once said, a diverse mix of voices leads to better discussions, decisions, and outcomes for everyone. And no doubt this works not only in for-profit businesses, but also in nonprofit clubs like ours. And so when we started to tackle this, we did start this quite early on. I believe as early as sometime before even the financial crisis, it was something that we had started to look into already. And broadly, we started working first internally and at the top of the leadership realm in the board and executive committee area before we are moving downstream, and then later focused on external realms, which I'll go into. And one of the key things we've learned is benchmarking is the first step. So simply to get started is to simply measure. We cannot know if we're doing better in anything unless we measure. And so in 2005, we had 7 board members, of whom 2 were women, that's 29%, and none were minorities. And fast forward to today, we have 11 board members, 36% women, with 4 of them being women, 1 of them Asian, yours truly, and we now have 2 minorities, which includes a double count of the Asian female, myself, and 1 Black male. We do have some room to grow here and do better, and we're ever looking at this. I will note that we have not instituted any form of quotas. I don't personally actually feel comfortable with that. I think that we have a lot of talented alumni to work from. There's no need to really set any quotas, but we haven't actually put a lens to it and really be focused around it. So right now we're just much more mindful about it, and then really looking at making the structure, the infrastructure possible to make that happen. So what we have done, as you can see over the years, is we added more board seats, and then we added term limits so that people, there have been people on the board for more than 10 years, some even 20 years. So we added term limits to retired board of director members and moved them to the board of governors, where we would maintain their engagement and the institutional memory that they offer as governance to the board, but they no longer will have fiduciary duties or responsibilities. And then we ensured that we're looking these days not only on gender diversity, but also ethnic diversity. The second area was drilling down to our executive committee, our VPs and the president. In 2016, we had 9 of us, and we grew by 1. By January of 2021, we have a succession plan, so we know what's going to be. We, in the past, had 44% of the executive committee were women, which is actually not too bad. The admission rate of Wharton today is around there. And 1 Black male and 1 Black Indian male, I'm sorry. And today, fast forward, really, we have a really great diverse group. In fact, 70% of the executive committee are minority. I think we still have improvement to be made. However, we realize that we have no representation in Black females and none also in the Hispanic group. So we realized that in order to get people to our executive committee, that we actually really need to build a pipeline. And so that's one of our next phases. Externally, we started benchmarking when I first came to my role as president of the club. So in June of 2017, we had a 25% female speaker mix. And by June of this year, it's improved to 35% female. and we still have a ways to go. And one thing we've realized is that it's actually quite hard to make this happen when we are not thinking about it every day. So sometimes people, the event chairs will put together an event and they have 3 white male panelists and they submit it to be posted on the website. And when you look at the picture of the speakers, it becomes, it really leaps out at you like, oh my gosh, we have no diversity here. So there's now been kind of a rule, if you will, that says that if your event doesn't have the diversity that's needed, that you would need to delay the event date until you have that diversity. I will say I did get some pushback from event chairs because they have spent a lot of time and energy to put together some fantastic speakers. But essentially, they seem to have no trouble getting speakers, that come from the majority. So decided to advise them on how sequencing could really help in the recruiting of speakers with a diverse mix. So start first with the folks that you deem to be quote unquote difficult to get, whether it's women, whether it's minority or both. Start there and then fill in the rest. And that might help. One of the things that we realized as volunteers is that time runs away from us and we didn't benchmark regularly. It was more like, oh, every now and then when we have time, we'll look at the numbers, count it up and say, oh, geez, the year just started and we're 6 months in already and time flew by. And next thing I know, we're front loaded with so much in the way of non-diverse people. Now we have to kind of dig ourselves out of the hole for the balance of the year, and it's very hard to do. So I think it's the lesson I've learned here is to benchmark more often. I used to do it maybe 3 months every quarter at best, maybe 4 or 5 months or even 6. But monthly, I think is really the better way to go so that you don't lose control of the things that you can do and lose time. We did not previously benchmark based on ethnicity. We didn't ask speakers and we can't always tell by looking at that picture. So this is something that we have decided that we will try to do because if we want to improve in this area, we won't be able to do it without benchmarking. One of the global diversity initiative strategists from Korn Ferry mentioned that diversity in itself is the mix, whereas inclusion is making the mix work. So these terminologies are thrown around: diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. And I think this is a helpful delineation. So in the second phase is where we wanted to dig a little deeper. And we started to look at our speaker events beyond gender. We're talking about ethnicities and other things. We have people who our alumni have started an affinity group for LGBT and all that. So I don't know whether we really want to ask speakers about that. It's just something we're thinking about, and maybe people don't have to answer such questions if they don't want to. It's optional. Obviously, we will have gaps in our benchmark data if that's the case, but as one of those things that we're contemplating what to do. Same goes for our volunteer chairs, going deeper and beyond the executive committee. And then we formed an equality task force this summer to really look at what else we can do, not just internally, but externally to help companies with their diversity and inclusion. So the Equality Task Force has 3 subcommittees. One is to focus on helping more women and minorities get onto boards and C-suite roles. The second committee is focused on building the pipeline for companies so that they can more easily find C-suite and board roles for minorities and women. And then the third is to provide resources and events related to such topics. So the third phase is to now go wide. Talked about volunteer benchmarking, so not just the volunteer chairs, but also their committee members within. And finally, also working externally beyond the Wharton Club of New York to advocate for greater diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in leadership roles, but just generally in the workplace, and also using the power of the purse, helping companies pressure where necessary, all things being equal, to buy from vendors who meet some of these criteria. And with that, I'll end with a wonderful quote from Jesse Jackson, who is a civil rights activist that when everyone is included, everyone wins.